Now let's go and make a head start. This is Romerian growth. This year's Nobel laureate, Paul Romer. And today we will go over his ideas, over his contribution, which earned him this year's Nobel. Not as a Nobel, but as I indicated, Bank of Sweden's the so-called Nobel in economics science. Romerian growth, or research and development, R&D driven growth. Here is the main idea. Starting from our popular Cobb-Douglas production function, or any other function in particular, suppose that national income is being produced by this process, something that we are all familiar with. Typically, in the traditional neoclassical framework, where each factors are paid their marginal product as remunerations, we need a balancing, a calibration parameter, something that we take exogenously. And loosely, we refer to as technology, level of doing things. And then, as it turned out, trying to understand the sources of growth empirically from the basis of capital and labor accumulation will not be enough to understand the total rate of growth. Changes in K, capital, plus changes in L, population, fails to take account of all the changes in output. There is something missing. So we treated this under Solow, things of ignorance that we cannot explain or capture for in the traditional neoclassical framework. Starting with Lucas and Romer, but dating from earlier contributions, we try to add things to this thing that we do not human capital, things that are taken exogenously in explaining growth. And of course, trying to understand something, growth, by assuming things exogenously is not of an explanation. You are simply saying that I do not know the sources of growth, and I am therefore assuming exogenous things to explain something like growth. Arguing that actually it is whatever this is the main source of growth, is the main idea of the so-called endogenous growth literature. Romer in particular mentioned that the main source of growth is what we refer to here as level of technology, which is increased by purposeful, explicit actions of profit-maximizing entrepreneurs. Technology is not something God's given. It doesn't happen flourishing out of some pure chance. It happens through entrepreneurial decisions who are seeking profits by purpose. It is not ad hoc. It is not exogenous. It is driven by profit motive, and that's the whole main idea. So finally then, we take account of three basic premises on growth. One, technological change is the only main source of growth. It is technology. In particular, investing in capital accumulation cannot be the source of growth. And this is very provocative statement. But as you know from Solow, if you do not assume exogenous growth, saving and investing only in capital runs into diminishing returns, and then at the end you have zero rate of growth. And that's we have proven this many times over and over again. As long as this gentleman here is less than 1, it is signaling that returns to capital is falling, and equating profit rate with the returns to capital, then profit rate is falling. Therefore, at the end, there is no reason to grow and invest. However, technical change is the source of growth. Well, but technology does not happen out of luck or any God's given ideas or anything. It happens due to profit maximizing purposeful actions of entrepreneurs. Technological change, let's say, occurs in response to purposeful actions of profit maximizing, this is pi, maximizing entrepreneurs. It is the market. It is entrepreneurs' profit maximizing motive that leads to technical change. Now, thirdly, some jargon here. Technology, if it is something to be purposefully sought for, it's a technology, it's an economic good. Technology is an economic good with obeying the laws of supply and demand, just like any other good, apples and bananas. But it is an interesting, special type of an economic good. It is non-rival and partially excludable. It's an economic good, but it's a non-rival good, as opposed to being a rival good. It is not a rival good. And it is neither fully excludable or fully non-excludable. It is partially excludable. Have you ever seen these terms before? Probably you have heard of rivalness, but what about excludability? Yes. You know it. Okay. Then let me just very quickly remind it, especially for our guests at the video corner. Rivalness is intrinsic to the commodity. It is the nature of things. Private goods are all rival. Apple, you pay the price, you take the apple, you consume it, apple is gone. So it cannot be consumed once again. It has to be reproduced if you want to consume a rival good once again. All pure private goods, more or less, are rival goods. Non-rival goods, at the other end of the spectrum, it is typically public goods. Bu ulusa gitmişsinizdir. There is a statue of Mustafa Kemal surrounded by the German soldiers in German uniform. That's 1930s. It's a glorious statue, one of the relics of the early republic. It's a pure public good. the fact that you consume it by, quote unquote, taking a snapshot or taking a photo or just admiring it, doesn't finish up, doesn't exhaust the good. It stays there. So you just pass by, you watch it, you cross it, someone else comes in, and it can also enjoy the same scenery. They are not finished. However, excludability, as you will remember, is something due to patent rights or the legal conditions of consumability. A typical excludable good is TV shows. There is a code, there is a price. As long as you do not have the cranking ability of the code, it is excludable. Now, interestingly, technology is non-rival, meaning that the fact that you are using a software package, the level of technology, does not finish up the software. As long as you pay the price for it, it is excludable, but it is out there. It doesn't disappear. But it is only partially excludable. There are violations of patent laws. There are limitations of your excludability power. You cannot simply hold on to the rights of the good for indefinite periods of time. Now, the basic thing, the bottom line of all these three premises is that taken together, technology, even though it's an economic good, subject to actions of the entrepreneurs, it cannot be produced and sold in a perfectly competitive environment. The reason being is that as a non-rival good, there are costs of producing it, but once these costs are borne and technology is created, then virtually it is free for everyone to use, unless you can exclude it. Typically what happens is, this is the level of technology, quantity that it is utilized. And this is costs of producing technology. In the first unit, the day iPhone zillion hits the market, what's now? It's either 8 or 10 or whatever. iPhone 20, at the cost of multi-million dollars, let's say Apple and Bananas had produced the first unit of the technology to produce a new iPhone. It is very expensive, it's not out there yet. But then, once you had the technology to produce the second good, the second unit of that iPhone is virtually zero. And then as you produce it along, the average costs per unit will be falling tremendously. And it will continue to fall, meaning that there will not be any upward swing of the average total cost, so that for the producer, the marginal cost is always decreasing as average total costs are decreasing. So if you equate price with marginal cost, as in competitive pricing, you will not be able to recover your costs. The firm in order to meet these fixed costs, to begin with, has to work in a non-competitive oligopolistic market. And this is one of the main blows to the traditional neoclassical model. The source of growth is technology, but technology has to be produced in a oligopolistic, monopolistic market. Perfect competition will not work. As you will see throughout the rest of this topic, this leads to the argument that the first welfare theorem of economics will fail. That is, every competitive equilibrium is Pareto optimal, and each Pareto optimal equilibrium can be turned into a perfectly competitive system. This will fail because we cannot operate with perfect competition. If we cannot operate with perfect competition, then there is room for a policy framework of a regulatory body. A regulatory agency can intervene and turn the non-existing private perfectly competitive system into a Pareto superior allocation. Perfect competition will fail as a Pareto optimal allocation under these conditions. We are saying something really big, and that's why Romer, one of the reasons that he got the Nobel, that we cannot explain the main source of growth under conditions of perfect competition. You have to have an oligopolistic inequilibrium, yes, but an oligopolistic non-competitive market. This is the basic setup. Now, enough for philosophy. Now let's go into the algebra of things. All right, here is the economy. If you try to portray of all these ideas into a simple model of an economy that is operating through R&D growth, R&D-driven growth, you will basically encounter 3 different activities in the economy. There has to be at least 3 activities. One, technological change. You have to come up with an activity to produce technological change. Secondly, it has to be in response to profit maximizing decisions, meaning that the fruits of production should be bought and sold. That is something we are going to call intermediate inputs. Each technology describes the technology of an intermediate good. Biçer döver, el arabası, Communist Manifesto, Bob Dylan songs, whatever. These are intermediate inputs that make business expand and the source of growth. Thirdly, we have to come up with an infrastructure to lead the decisions of entrepreneurs, whether they should produce an intermediate input or simply enjoy their lives. That is the savings investment behavior of the economy. And the bottom line, we need to produce. We need a production function. Now, as before, we are going to operate with one good economies, and I'm going to call this the national income, the gross domestic product. We are no longer in a hububat economy or corn or wheat or whatever. We are producing gross domestic product. This is my first activity. Suppose that we use labor to produce GDP. Plain labor, miners, construction workers, agricultural workers, whatever. Not you. You are not part of business production yet. Actually, you are not part of anything useful yet, but these will change. Then, rather than capital, we have a series of intermediate inputs, starting from the first input, and we are going to call this x to the power alpha. And the number of these inputs range from x1, x2, x3, all to the power alpha, x1 to the power alpha, x2 to the power alpha, etc., etc. And they go up to the level of technology in the economy. If you open this statement up, this is what we have. Ly to the power alpha, x1 minus alpha, x1 plus alpha. Ly to the power 1 minus alpha, x2 alpha, dot, dot, dot, dot, dot. Ly to the power 1 minus alpha, xa to the power alpha, and dot, dot, dot. This is exactly the contribution of Romer. A keeps changing, keeps increasing. As one more technology, blueprint, research, idea, one more blueprint, a new idea comes in, A increases, and the new dot, dot, dot over here, Ly to the 1 minus alpha, xa plus 1, whatever that unit is. It is colonization of Mars, then colonization of outer space, then medicine to common cold, gripin ilacı. Unutmayın, doktorlar hala bu konuda yetersizler. Biz enflasyon ilacını bulduk, hasta almak istemiyor, o başka. Ama yani, common cold does not have any medicine. Suppose that this is it I will not see this in my lifetime, probably you will, but who knows. These are new ideas out there to be discovered. And as new ideas are discovered, the number of intermediate inputs will be available to the system. Therefore, Y will increase. Right now, we have only a number of, the level of technology is A. But next year, next month, next hour, a new Einstein, a new Nobel will come up, and will come up with a new idea, and this will go into the infinite future. That growth will be continuing, but the only source of growth is change in A. There is no capital accumulation otherwise. There is no savings, investment, that sort of a thing. A increases. Well, then as a new activity, now I have to explain how A changes. I'm going to write it over here. A changes over time. I'm going to use some gamma parameter, again, just like an exogenous calibration variable. It could be taken as 1, not in moment, times LA. LA is workers employed in research, typically you, and myself, and Emre Bey, and Refet Hoca, Bilin Hoca, whoever is out there in doing research, carving the scientific frontier. LA plus LY is the total number of working force in the economy. Each individual, imagine yourself here, okay, in the library reading books. Gamma is something like your productivity. How many lines you can type in an hour, how many lines you can read in 1 hour, number of sophisticated multi-differential calculus you can crank out, number of logarithms you can do, your expertise, or the number of characters you can type in the iPhone. But A dot, that is new ideas, are produced also by resorting to previously produced ideas. We are all using rules of calculus. We are all using rules of limit theorems, integration, old ideas. We are using the lines in poetry. We are making philosophical remarks, taking account of the music, literature, science, everything, the stock of knowledge that humankind has accumulated until today. This is the Romerian R&D function. It is not standard, it is not unique, and we are going to make a big deal out of it shortly. But it is brilliant. It is one of the most innovative descriptions of the source of growth, simple, powerful, like the AK model. It's brutal, but it solves the problem. You see, when you look at this thing, when you convert this into rate of growth form, A dot over A, let's call this G, rate of growth, right? What is it equal to? It is gamma. Let me clear this mimic person here. This is equal to gamma times LA. You see, gamma is a parameter. And if LA is regarded constant, that is the number of researchers, then you have a constant rate of perpetual growth. At each round, a new A plus 1, right? This is A plus 1 over A. This is our A dot over A. This happens how? Gamma times LA. Next year, A plus 2, A plus 1. It happens gamma times LA, constant. Years pass, A plus N, the 22nd century, A plus N minus 1. Again, gamma times LA. The rate of growth is constant over time. And the constancy come up from the number of researchers. Rate of growth of technology is constant. Therefore, technology being the only source of growth, rate of growth of GDP is constant. We do not care about the number of blueprints, but we do care about the number of bread at our home, the GDP. So in equilibrium, y dot over y is nothing but the rate of growth of the blueprints, which is constant. The whole thing is driven by the R&D function. It is terribly important, and the Romerian innovation has generated a constant rate of growth R&D function, which through accumulation here goes and produces a constant rate of GDP. You have to notice that in this formulation, I do not have any alphas, betas, gammas, whatever on these things. That is, there are no diminishing returns to number of researchers' activity. It is simple, but it is not innocent. Again, this is one of the historical contributions to economics where some assumptions are thrown under the carpet. By writing this, we implicitly assume that research is not subject to diminishing returns. If it were subject to diminishing returns, we will be again back to Solov's model. And this will be questioned by Charles Jones. We'll question the validity of this R&D function based on empirical research. And we are going to see this as long as we finish up our algebra. So this is the production side of the economy. Very simple, very elegant. Here, these characters, Ly plus La, workers in business plus workers in a research laboratory, is the total supply of our labor force. Which at this round, we have to decide our labor supply, who will go to research, who will go and produce GDP. If everyone goes and produces GDP, we have a lot of GDP, but for 1 year. If everyone goes and produces R&D, we will have a lot of potential, lots of research, but there will not be anyone who will be producing GDP. So there is a trade-off over there. Okay, now let me put numbers. This is my number 1 activity, and I will call this number 3 activity. There is something in between. And this is a little bit hard to swallow, but easy to understand. Research, what is research? Research is this. My lecture notes, your notes. You wake up one morning, you write the Communist Manifesto. It's your research. You write the Bob Dylan song. It eases you, it makes you more productive, but this does not produce machinery. But it has instructions in it to produce intermediate inputs. But by itself, it is pure ideas. Well, what are the instructions? The instructions are cut some lizard's tail, put some frog's legs, some salt, some pepper, boil it in 200 degrees, stir it, and serve cold. This is the recipe for going to Mars. But you cannot go to Mars by this. This is different than X. X is the end result of these blueprints. Without the blueprints, no X. But with the blueprints, without X, it's a good idea, but alas. So there has to be an activity in between, meaning that this guy has to pay the price for this blueprint, for this research, right? This is our big fat monopolist, okay? This is the oligopoly. Apple or Microsoft Corporation or anything in between. What they do, they pay a price to purchase the new blueprint, new idea. And this thing sells for price of research. It could be a couple of $1 million to come up with the new idea to produce something, but you haven't produced yet. It is nights and day, endless times of research time. Finally, wages are paid here, the past research is valued, patents or whatever had been paid, and you came up with a new research, and this guy will buy this research by paying its price. PA could be something high. I read sometime that it was actually Abdullah Atalar's one of the remarks that quite a number of years ago, the numbers had been changed. Each scientific paper produced at Bilkent costs roughly around $40,000. TÜBİTAK has similar estimates. This is only the price of coming up of a scientific article to appear in journals, in books, etc. Well, some monopolist pays that price, then looks at the instructions in, and then we make a simplifying assumption that each new A is producing one new intermediate input. Whatever the number of intermediate inputs here, this is the last advancement in science which has the most up-to-date blueprint and ideas through which we have produced X. X is iPhone 20. Next year, we are going to produce iPhone 21. It is not out there. Researchers are working on it. It will sell at the price of PA plus 1, whatever it is. It's not out there yet. Some entrepreneur will go and pick it up, pay that price, look at the instructions, and produce the X. But once they are doing, they want to sell it in the market at the price P of X. That's the price of the intermediate good. There is a price of the blueprint, and there is a price of the intermediate good which uses the blueprint to produce X. These are quantities of X times price. This is revenues from this operation. But we have costs. First of all, we have fixed costs. We have priced PA times A dot, already paid. These are fixed costs. It's paid, gone. You cannot do anything about it. Also, there are variable costs. And the variable costs are like to produce the Apple phone, you use ideas how to produce it, but you use other intermediate inputs. As I said, you use lizard's tail. You use salt and pepper. You use cement. You use aluminum. You use whatever. So to produce a new intermediate good, you have to use other intermediate goods as well. Nothing is produced out of nothing. Ideas of how to use intermediates to produce a new intermediate. And we are going to make their rental price, like we have renting capital. And we are going to use an input-output coefficient. I'm using eta for it. Eta is the input required to produce one more output of X. It's in fixed conditions. It is not subject to any optimizing calculus or anything. There are no substitution possibilities. To produce 1 unit of X, you use eta units of all other inputs. This is variable costs of production, fixed costs of production, together total cost of production. Revenues minus total costs is the profits associated with that intermediate input that needs to be maximized. So the monopolist is an intermediary firm, an entrepreneur, an intellectual over here, who is buying the technology at the price of PA, which is being produced at the research lab according to this rule, pays its price, reads the instructions, this is its fixed costs, looks at the variable cost of production and the revenues, and this is to be maximized. This cannot be under perfect competition conditions because of the presence of fixed costs. If this guy uses the marginal cost pricing, the marginal cost is very simple in this economy. This is fixed costs, it drops out. Marginal costs is R times eta. So equating price with R due to the presence of fixed costs will not cover the guy's total costs. Price equals R times eta under perfect competition will not work. You have to have net profits here to be able to cover the fixed costs. These fixed costs are necessary to work in the research lab. Without PA, without this $40,000, research will not be produced because you have to pay at least salaries to the workers and patent rights to previously accumulated knowledge. Producing technology costs, and someone has to bear the costs of that technology. And for that someone to do so, they have to earn money out of it as well. All right, now let's make this operational. Let's start from the first activity. In GDP production, we hire labor Ly according to what their marginal productivity is. Therefore, wages paid in business is simply the simple derivative of this production function. 1 minus alpha Ly to the power alpha times all this sum, I from 1a to alpha. Or if you make a relevant substitutions, this is 1 minus alpha times y divided by Ly. This is the labor demand function of the firm. Now, where does this Px come from? It comes from demand for these. The intermediate firm will take those prices from the marginal willingness to pay of the GDP producer for each intermediate. Whatever the GDP firm, producing firm, is willing to pay to X1, to X2, to X3, that is Px, depends on the marginal productivity of those X's. So Px, let me write Pxi, or let me write this, yeah, Pxi, is simply the derivative of this thing, Ly to the power 1 minus alpha, alpha xi to the power alpha minus 1. Then let's continue with the intermediate firm now. This is the GDP production. Intermediate production of xi. What the firm does is tries to maximize P of xi times xi minus PA times A dot minus R eta xi. that thing here for the ith intermediate firm. Harmless assumption. This is not one of the big assumptions. This is a truly harmless one. This is an input-output coefficient, which is taken as something arbitrary. How many units of other inputs do you need to produce one more unit of xi? We are going to take this as one-to-one. That is, to produce 1 unit of iPhone, you need 1 unit of steel. To produce 1 unit of aluminum, you need 1 unit of copper, that sort of a thing. So I don't want excessive things out there. Implicitly, I am working with a one-to-one input-output function table. So we take the derivative of this thing. Px is this Px. So I take a derivative of this thing, P prime x times x plus P of x, all i's. I'm not going to put i's anymore. Derivative of P of x inside the price function. And Px is this function over here, times x plus the derivative of x times Px. This thing drops out. And this is already taken as 1 minus r is equal to 0. Now, P prime x is Ly to the power 1 minus alpha. Alpha times alpha minus 1. Xi to the power alpha minus 2 this time. This is P prime times xi plus px is equal to r. Once you multiply this, this will go as alpha minus 1. So we have alpha minus 1 times px plus px is equal to r. And once you solve for p of x, you get 1 over alpha times r. And if you want, let's put a star here to indicate that this is the profit maximizing price that the oligopolist will charge to the GDP producer when selling the good. So this price will be sold at this price. This is the function, this is the willingness to pay of the producer. The intermediate firm takes that willingness to pay price, maximizes its profits by treating it as a function of its decisions. It is not a parameter as in perfect competitive model. And after solving it, we get a price equals R. What was our R? Rental, but with theta here, implicitly here, R times theta. It's our marginal cost, actually. If it were a competitive firm, price would have been equal to R times eta, the rental price. The rental price will be equal to marginal cost of producing that good. But we are no longer in a competitive world. We are also putting a 1 over alpha. Alpha is less than 1. So 1 over alpha is some price higher than the marginal cost. The firm is using 1 over alpha times marginal cost. This 1 over alpha is like a markup over marginal costs. It's an optimal markup. Tell me the marginal cost rental price, R. Then I apply my markup, whatever alpha is, and observe that alpha is coming from the share of that intermediate input in GDP production. The firm sees this, charges the inverse of it as a markup over costs. To finish this thing, the profits then will be equal to P of X times X minus R times X. Under operation, we are forgetting the fixed costs. Fixed costs are gone. I mean, you cannot do anything about this. And here, since R is equal to alpha times P of X, okay, optimally, my profits at its maximum, profit when maximized is equal to 1 minus alpha times P of X times X. That is the maximal profits possible in the setup for each intermediary. Let me clarify this. Look here, there are I1, IA, and then new firms. There are a number of little firms doing this operation. One giant producer, one research lab, a number of little characters, each maximizing oligopolist. Each has bought one idea, produced one intermediate good, a new idea, a new firm, a new blueprint, a new intermediate firm, another firm, another intermediate good. So each X is produced one oligopolist, one non-competitive producer, but there are a number of X's like this. So in the economy, there are a number of oligopolies, each doing whatever they want to do to maximize profits. Any questions on the algebra, on the ideas? Let me just portray this graphically, and then let's stop it there and continue from the basic setup. We have only constructed the operation, how this economy is operating. Here is what's happening. This is the oligopolist situation. We have price and costs, and we have the quantity of X being produced. The marginal cost is R times eta. That's the marginal cost here. That's the marginal cost, and marginal cost is R times eta. We have an ever-falling average total cost figure. That's the average total costs due to fixed cost of production. Now suppose that this is our demand curve. That is this curve over here. Px is equal to 1 minus alpha, alpha times Ly to the power 1 minus alpha, xi to the power alpha minus 1. This thing over here. That's our demand curve. What the firm does is it equates marginal revenue, which is this thing, marginal revenue, with the marginal cost, which is R times eta. At this instruction, This is our optimal X. I go up and I calculate the optimal price. And this optimal price is equal to 1 over alpha times R times eta, and eta is 1. Now, as you see from this picture, to produce this X and sell it at P, this is my total costs, and there are profits over here. Şunu değiştirelim, şunu variable costs yapalım. This will be clearer, or else I have to make one more graph. Average variable costs, marginal cost, and this is the price, this is costs, and therefore this is the profits, which is equal to 1 minus alpha times . What will happen to those profits?
They will go down as technology.
That is true, but they will spend somewhere. Variable costs, not variable costs actually, is the costs of research. See, in equilibrium, if we want to stay in equilibrium, these research costs had to be paid by someone. They can be paid by a loving sultan just out of some pockets of Muhteşem Süleyman or Alexander the Great or one of those characters in history. But a capitalist economy doesn't operate with sultans and of that sort. A capitalist economy operates with profits and costs. Therefore, in my picture, these profits has to be paid to the research and development costs, that is PA times A dot. At the end of the day, there are no net opportunities to earn from all these operations. If there were opportunities, then there will definitely be a monopolistic competitor bidding that price down. This is not pure monopoly. It is monopolistically competitive or oligopolistic setup. There is always threat of newcomers. That is because technology is only partially excludable. You cannot completely defend yourself. This is still open to leaks and interventions. There are the threat of entrance, which drives this price all the way down to the price, and the average total cost, including this, clears up all these profits. Otherwise, there will be, as I said, threat of newcomers. If losses, people will drive out. This equilibrium seemingly produces profits, but these profits had to be spent on just to make this operation operational. And this is the very long run equilibrium in the market. What happens is the intermediate guy goes and purchases A dot. A dot is being produced in the research lab with this function. This is purchased by the intermediate firm. PA is paid back. And then it sells it at the price X to the Y production. Each new intermediate firm, this sweatshop, this is the A plus 1, A plus 2, A plus 3, purchases PA, sells PX plus 1, PX plus 2, X plus 3, and this expands Y. The rate of growth of Y happens to be the rate of growth of this thing. New blueprint emerges. There is this shark, this vulture, this profit maximizing guy, dying for thirst of profit, bloodsucker or whatever, however you describe the character, smells these profits, pays this PA, looks at the operation, sets up the firm, pays this R times theta, produces X, sells it at PX, 1 over alpha times R. Everything is nice, but at the end of the day, he figures out that he had done all this operation just to produce X, and all these profits had been paid to the research lab. The costs over here are very simple. It is the wage costs of the research personnel over here. But they have to be borne by someone, and the price of PA had to be borne by the monopolistic profits here. If you insist that this PX is the marginal cost, that it cannot cover this, then these profits will not be out there, and the PA cannot be purchased. Brilliant setup. Any concerns, questions, any feeling, any gaps to be filled out, any objections?
Why? Because the growth of technology is constant.
Because you want to have a constant rate of growth, endogenous growth model.
So under that assumption, also we assume that each of the research has same effect. Similar.
Exactly. That's the question is, if you want to have a constant rate of growth, each new research has to produce new intermediate. Each new intermediate has to come up with the same alpha over here. Those parameters has to stay constant. Otherwise, we will have technology-driven business cycles. But the question is important because when we test this empirically, as I indicated, when you check with Jones' evaluation, the idea of having a constant rate of growth over here is challenged by empirical facts. But if you change this assumption, if you put, let's say, a phi over here, phi less than 1, then each new round is producing new research, each being less effective than the previous one. Therefore, in the very long run, the productivity of research diminishes, and there is no reason to do research. Or additional researchers cannot produce additional research at the same level. And we will be again driven back to the Solov model. But this is John's idea, and we are going to cover that as well.